The docking bay of the United Nations space station hummed with activity as the crew prepared for the arrival of the alien delegation from Virnaris. The air was thick with anticipation. Captain James Hartley, the station's commander, checked the alignment of his uniform one last time before nodding to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Marcus Green. "They're about to dock," Marcus said, peering at the monitor showing the sleek silver Vernarian ship approaching. "Let's make sure we give them a warm welcome," James replied. The bay doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing the delegation. Descending from their vessel, leading the group, was Alira, her tall, lithe figure distinguished by the shimmering scales that caught the light with every step she took. Her eyes, a deep cerulean, scanned the room curiously. James stepped forward, extending a hand. "Welcome to Unity Station, Alira. I'm Captain Hartley, and this is Lieutenant Green. We are honored by your visit." Alira studied his hand for a moment before taking it in hers. Her grip was firm, her skin cool to the touch. "The honor is ours, Captain. Your station is renowned across the stars for its efforts in galactic diplomacy." Marcus smiled. "We hope your stay here will be comfortable and enlightening." A young man, Michael, the station's anthropologist, approached with a friendly grin. "I'm Michael Benson. I'll be your guide during your stay. Shall we start the tour?" Alira nodded, and the group began moving through the corridors. The station's walls were adorned with artifacts from various civilizations, each piece telling a story of humanity's journey to the stars. "You have quite a collection," Alira remarked, her gaze lingering on a piece of ancient Martian sculpture. Michael beamed. "Each artifact represents a step towards understanding other cultures. We hope to add something from Virnaris, too, if you're willing." Alira's lips curved into a smile. "I believe that can be arranged." As they walked, James and Marcus discussed the station's operations with Alira, explaining how the various departments work together to maintain peace and order in the sector. "What impresses me most is the cooperation among your people," Alira said, observing the crew members working in harmony. "It's not always smooth," James admitted, "but we strive for a balance. What about Virnaris? How do you manage governance?" Alira's expression became thoughtful. "Our methods are different, but the goal is the same: harmony, balance. Maybe there's much we can learn from each other." They reached the observation deck, where the vastness of space stretched out before them, dotted with the twinkling lights of distant stars and galaxies. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Marcus said, joining Alira by the large viewport. "It puts things into perspective," she agreed, her voice soft. Michael watched their interactions with interest. "Alira, tomorrow we've arranged a small cultural exchange. We'd love for you to share something about Virnaris. Perhaps your personal experiences?" "I would be pleased to share," she replied, turning from the viewport with a decisive nod. "And I'm eager to learn from you as well." As the group made their way back to the guest quarters, the chatter was light, but full of promise. The beginnings of a new friendship, perhaps even an alliance, were slowly taking shape in the corridors of Unity Station. Chapter 2. The Challenge. Alira sat across from James, Marcus, and Michael in the station's central meeting room. The space was comfortably lit, the air filled with a faint hum of machinery and the occasional murmur of crew members passing by outside. The table was scattered with a few personal trinkets, an old Earth chess set, a digital puzzle sphere, a hand-carved figurine from a Vernarian elder. Michael leaned back in his chair and studied Alira for a moment. "So, Alira, your people have this reputation for unshakable determination. We've heard you can outlast most other species in tests of endurance, both mental and physical." Alira raised a scaled brow, a hint of amusement in her expression. "It is not just reputation. It is fact. Vernarians are conditioned from youth to endure. We train our minds to overcome doubt, our bodies to surpass fatigue. It is simply our way." Marcus glanced at Michael. "Sounds like she's calling us soft." Alira turned her gaze to Marcus. "I did not say that, but if you believe otherwise, you are free to prove me wrong." James chuckled, arms crossed. You know, I think I'd enjoy seeing that. Michael smirked. All right, let's put it to the test. Elira, have you ever played the Earth game known as Go? He reached across the table, pulling a black and white board from the shelf behind him. The small stones clinked softly as he set it down. It's all about strategy, patience, and outthinking your opponent. No brute strength involved, just mental endurance. Elira's eyes narrowed, studying the board. I have not encountered this game before. How does one win? Michael began arranging the stones as he explained. You claim territory. Every move requires you to think about your next steps and how to counter the other player's strategy. The goal is to control more space than your opponent by the end of the game. Simple rules, but it's a deep mental battle. It can last hours, sometimes days, if both players are evenly matched. Elira watched closely, her focus sharpening. And you believe this game will test one's endurance? Marcus grinned. Oh, it's more than that. It'll test your ability to adapt. You'll need to be flexible, think ahead, maybe even step out of your comfort zone. Step out of my comfort zone? Elira repeated, tilting her head. You believe I will struggle? Michael nodded. Not because you're lacking, but because the game isn't about the kind of discipline you're used to. It's about reading your opponent, predicting their choices, and sometimes choosing the unexpected. James, who had been silent, chimed in. And let's be honest, we humans like a challenge. We thrive when the odds are against us. You might find us more difficult to defeat than you expect. Elira's lips twitched into a faint smile. Then, I accept. Show me how this game is played. Hours later, the group had moved from the central meeting room to a more relaxed lounge area. The Go board rested on the table, its grid half filled with carefully placed stones. Elira sat on one side, Michael on the other. While James and Marcus observed from nearby seats, Elira placed a black stone onto the board with deliberate precision. Your move, Michael. Michael leaned in, scratching his chin. You're starting to see the rhythm, but here's the thing. He placed a white stone further up the board, cutting off one of her emerging patterns. I'm not playing. By the same patterns. Elira frowned slightly, her blue eyes scanning the grid. You broke my formation. Sure did, Michael said, leaning back with a grin. That's the beauty of the game. It's all about reading me, not just the, board. What do you think I'm going to do next? Elira studied him for a moment. You are unpredictable. You smile when you play, yet you plan several moves ahead. This game is more than simple endurance. James crossed his arms, nodding. That's human nature for you. We're stubborn, sure, but we also adapt. You might need more than sheer willpower to beat Michael. Elira's smile widened. Good. I appreciate a true challenge. Marcus watched the exchange, shaking his head. You two are going to be at this all night, aren't you? Probably, Michael replied, his eyes still on Elira. But that's the fun of it. James got up, stretching. Well, I'm heading to the mess hall for some coffee. Elira, if you want anything, let us know. Marcus, you coming? Yeah. I could use a break. Marcus glanced at Michael. You sure you've got this? Definitely, Michael said, moving another white stone. I think I've got her on the ropes. Elira's laughter was soft, but genuine. You think so? I know so. As James and Marcus left, the tension around the board shifted. The initial formality had given way to a friendly rivalry, the kind that builds between two people eager to understand one another. Elira's moves became faster, more deliberate. Michael responded in kind, his voice filled with enthusiasm as he explained the nuances of the game. The room felt warmer, more personal, as they exchanged strategies and theories. The game continued late into the night, each move a conversation in itself. By the time the board was nearly full, it was clear that this was more than just a competition. It was the start of a deeper understanding. Chapter 3. Learning the rules, Elira stared at the Go board on the table between her and Michael. its grid filled with clusters of black and white stones. She leaned forward, the soft, ambient light of the lounge highlighting the faint shimmer of her scales. "So you can only place one stone at a time, and once it's down, it stays there?" Elira asked, tapping her clawed finger lightly on the table. "Exactly," Michael replied, "and any group of stones that gets surrounded is captured, meaning you take them off the board. The goal is to control as much of the board as possible by the end." Elira tilted her head. "This seems deceptively simple." Michael grinned, leaning back in his chair. "You're not the first person to think that. But once you start playing, you'll see how much strategy is involved. It's not just about claiming space, it's about how you do it. Every move you make is connected to the next." Elira's gaze shifted from the board to Michael, studying his expression. "And you think this will test how do humans phrase it? My mental endurance?" "Definitely," Michael said. "It's not like a physical competition. It's more about patience and planning and reading your opponent." "Reading?" Elira asked. "As in predicting their actions?" "Exactly," he said. "It's like a conversation, except the words are your moves. You can say a lot without ever speaking." Marcus, sitting nearby, leaned in. "Michael always makes it sound so philosophical. He just doesn't want to admit he's a sore loser." "I am not a sore loser," Michael shot back, grinning. Marcus smirked. "Sure, tell that to the maintenance tech who beat you last week." "That dufferer doesn't count. I was distracted," Michael said, waving him off. Elira's lips curved into a faint smile. "I see this game also involves a certain degree of, what's the word?" She paused, her accent softening the English syllables. "Banter?" Michael laughed. "Oh, absolutely. The best games always do. Don't let Marcus fool you, though. He's terrible at this." "Hey," Marcus said, holding up his hands. "I've won my fair share of matches. Only because I taught you everything you know," Michael countered. Elira glanced between the two men, her smile lingering. "This game may be more entertaining than I expected." James entered the lounge, a mug of steaming coffee in hand. He raised an eyebrow at the trio. "What's going on here?" "Just teaching Elira how to play Go," Michael said, gesturing to the board. James nodded. "Ah, good luck with that. She'll probably pick it up faster than you did, Michael." "I'm not that bad," Michael replied, his tone light. James chuckled. "I'll leave you to it." He headed to a nearby table, settling in with his coffee and a datapad. Elira focused back on the board, her fingers resting near the black stones. "What happens if I place a stone here?" She pointed to a spot on the grid. "Then you'll connect those stones, forming a group," Michael said. "It'll make them stronger because they're harder to capture, but it also makes you more predictable." Elira considered this for a moment before picking up a black stone and placing it down. "Predictable, you say?" Michael's grin widened. "Not bad. But now I have to do this." He placed a white stone that disrupted her formation. Elira narrowed her eyes at the board. "You cut me off." "Yup. And now you have to adapt." That's what makes this game so challenging. No single move will win it for you. It's about thinking several moves ahead. Marcus leaned closer. "You'll find that Michael loves the sound of his own advice. Don't let him fool you. Half the time he's making it up as he goes along." "Not true," Michael said with a smirk. Elira placed another black stone, a thoughtful look on her face. "It is an interesting game. I believe I understand the rules now." "Great," Michael said, placing his next stone. "Now let's see how good you really are." The banter continued as the game progressed, the board gradually filling with stones. Elira's moves grew more deliberate, her strategy evolving as she began to anticipate Michael's maneuvers. Marcus chimed in with the occasional quip, and James, though occupied at his table, occasionally glanced over with a bemused smile. By the end of the session, the tension around the board had shifted from polite instruction to a genuine battle of wits. Elira's final move caught Michael off guard, and he leaned back in his chair, laughing. "Okay, I'll admit it, you're a quick learner." Elira smiled, placing her hands on the table. And you are a worthy teacher. But I believe I will win next time. Michael raised an eyebrow. Next time, huh? We'll see about that. Perhaps you should practice, Michael, Marcus teased. You know, before you embarrass yourself again. Elira tilted her head, her smile widening. Do humans always talk this much during their games? Only the fun ones, Michael replied, grinning. Chapter 4. Deepening Bonds. The next morning, Elira met Michael in the station's arboretum. The artificial environment was lush with earth flora, a quiet oasis of green amidst the stations. Otherwise metallic and utilitarian corridors. A faint, soothing hum of air filters and gently trickling water created a serene backdrop. Elira was examining a flowering plant with soft pink blooms when Michael entered, hands in his jacket pockets. I see you found our little slice of nature, he said, his voice breaking the stillness. She glanced up at him, her scaled face catching the soft light. It is unexpected. I did not anticipate the station to house such beauty. Michael shrugged. It's meant to remind us of home. A lot of crew members spend their free time here. He gestured toward a small bench beneath a willow-like tree. You want to sit? I can tell you a bit more about these plants. Elira nodded, following him over. As they sat, Michael pointed out the various species surrounding them. This one's a cherry blossom, beautiful during the springtime back on Earth. And over there, that's a fern, pretty low maintenance. It thrives in indirect light, which works well here. Elira studied the foliage intently, her gaze thoughtful. Your people have preserved this life despite leaving your planet. This speaks of your appreciation for your origins. Something like that, Michael said, picking a blade of grass and twirling it between his fingers. We like to carry a piece of home wherever we go. Elira's expression softened. My people also have traditions that tie us to our world. When we travel far from Virnaris, we bring small tokens, stones from the great cliffs, strands of woven moss. They serve as reminders of where we come from. Michael leaned forward. That's fascinating. Do you have anything like that with you now? She reached into a pouch at her side and withdrew a small, smooth stone etched with intricate patterns. This is from the Singing Canyons. It is said that the winds carry the voices of our ancestors through the stone's ridges. Michael examined the stone, his interest clear. It's beautiful, and it sings? Elira nodded. When the wind moves just right, the sound is soothing. It reminds us of our place in the world, of the people who came before us. Michael handed the stone back carefully. You know, we have something kind of similar, in a way. Certain caves on Earth have these incredible echoes. People used to believe they were hearing spirits or gods. Turns out it's just acoustics, but it's still pretty cool to think about. Elira tilted her head, her gaze meeting his. Even when you understand the science, you still find meaning in it? Of course, Michael said. Sometimes the meaning isn't just about what you know, it's about what you feel. For a moment they sat in silence, the quiet hum of the arboretum filling the space. Then Elira gestured to a small pool of water nearby. That fountain, is purely decorative? Yeah, Michael said. It's just for atmosphere, calming to look at, though. Sometimes I come here when I need to think. Elira stood, walking over to the fountain. She reached out and let the water flow over her hand. On Virnaris, water is scarce in some regions. We do not waste it in such ways. But I see the appeal. It is soothing. Michael joined her, standing at her side. That's the thing about this station. It's a blend of necessity and comfort. We need the arboretum to help with air quality and to give the crew a mental break. A little green space can do wonders. Elira looked up at him. You consider the mental well-being of your crew as essential as their physical needs. That is thoughtful. Michael smiled. It's just good leadership, I think. People perform better when they're happy and healthy. I'd like to think your leaders do the same. She hesitated, then nodded. In their own way, yes, though our methods may differ. As they continued walking, Michael found himself sharing more about his own experiences, what it was like growing up on Earth, how he ended up on Unity Station, the challenges of interstellar diplomacy. Elira listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested. In turn, she spoke of her time on Vernaris, the rigorous training she had undergone, and the traditions of her people. Michael realized that behind her confident, stoic demeanor was someone deeply connected to her world and her culture. As they circled back to their starting point, Michael looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Elira, I think we're not so different. We both value our homes, our traditions. It's just that the way we express it is shaped by our environments," Elira finished, her lips curving into a small smile. "Yes, I see that now," Michael nodded. "I think this is how understanding starts, not through grand speeches or official meetings, but just conversations." "Conversations," Elira repeated. "A simple concept. Yet it holds great potential." They both stood quietly for a moment, looking out over the greenery, the sound of the fountain in the background. It wasn't a grand or dramatic moment, but it felt significant. Two beings from very different worlds finding common ground through something as simple as talking and walking together. Chapter 5. The Contest. The rec room was buzzing with activity. Crew members lounged on worn chairs, some chatting in low tones, others gathered around tables where card games were in progress. A few looked up as Elira and Michael entered. The tall Vernarian woman was hard to miss, her shimmering scales catching the fluorescent light. Michael walked beside her, go board under his arm, a grin on his face. "So," Michael said, placing the board on a central table, "ready to see if your endurance skills can handle a mental game?" Elira tilted her head slightly, her blue eyes narrowing in mock suspicion. "You make it sound as though my victory is not assured," Michael chuckled. "Confidence is good, but overconfidence, that's what gets you in trouble." James and Marcus entered the room, grabbing seats near the table. James raised an eyebrow. "You really think you're going to beat her, Michael?" "I'm not saying it's going to be easy," Michael replied, "but I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." Elira sat opposite him, her movements fluid and deliberate. "Let us begin then. Show me these tricks." As Michael began setting up the board, Marcus leaned toward James and muttered, "He's got guts." "I'll give him that," James smirked. "Let's see if he's got the brains to match." The first few moves were cautious. Elira placed her stones with meticulous care, her eyes flicking between the grid and Michael's face. He responded, with quick, confident moves, his hand steady as he placed each white stone. "You learn quickly," Elira said after a few rounds. "Thanks," Michael replied. "You're not bad yourself." "Not bad?" Elira repeated, her tone teasing. "Perhaps you should reconsider your assessment after a few more moves." The spectators leaned forward as the game progressed. Marcus whispered to James, "She's playing the long game, isn't she? Look at how she's spreading out her stones." James nodded. "She's thinking ahead." "Michael's more reactive. He'll have to adapt fast if he wants to keep up." Michael placed a stone that cut into Elira's formation. "There we go. Let's see how you handle that." Elira raised an eyebrow. "Interesting, I will admit. You're more challenging than I anticipated." "I'll take that as a compliment," Michael said, his smile widening. As the game wore on, Elira began to shift her strategy. Her moves became bolder, more unpredictable. Michael noticed her subtle glances, the slight hesitation before placing a stone. "You're starting to enjoy this," he said, placing another white stone. Elira allowed herself a faint smile. "It is, engaging. I had not considered such a game to be so intricate." Michael nodded. "That's the thing about Go. It's not just about the board. It's about reading your opponent, thinking ahead, and sometimes throwing them off their rhythm." Elira placed a black stone in a surprising spot, effectively trapping a small group of Michael's pieces. He blinked, then laughed. "Okay, that was good." Marcus leaned in, grinning. "She's got you on the ropes now." Not quite, Michael replied, leaning forward. I've got a few moves left. James crossed his arms. You're both holding up better than I expected. Usually someone's looking frazzled by now. Elira's eyes stayed on the board. It is not a matter of frazzle, Captain Hartley. It is a matter of focus, and my focus remains sharp. Michael glanced up at her. We'll see about that. The game continued, each move carefully calculated, each player silently weighing the consequences of their next choice. The room grew quieter, the casual chatter fading as more people turned their attention to the unfolding match. Michael leaned back after placing a stone that cut into one of Elira's larger formations. Looks like I've got you surrounded. Elira studied the board, then met his gaze. You are skilled, Michael, but this is far from over. That's the spirit, he replied, gesturing for her to make her move. She placed another black stone, this time reinforcing her defenses. Tell me, Michael, Elira said, do all humans find pleasure in such games of strategy? Not all of us, he admitted, but those who do know it's about more than just winning. It's about testing yourself, seeing how far you can push your mind. Elira tilted her head. A curious perspective. In my culture, such contests are viewed as trials of strength, but I see now that you frame it differently. Michael nodded. It's about growth, learning something new. And yeah, I'll admit it, it's also about having a little fun. Elira's lips curved into a small smile. Then I will ensure you find this fun by the time I win. Big talk, Michael said with a grin. Let's see if you can back it up. The match continued late into the evening, each move carefully considered, each comment exchanged, adding to the growing camaraderie between the two. The game was no longer just a contest. It had become a conversation, a shared experience, a bridge between two very different beings. Chapter 6. Revelations. Elira leaned back, studying the go board in front of her. The once sparse grid was now a chaotic web of black and white stones, the shape shifting as each move added new layers of strategy. Michael sat across from her, arms crossed, his brow furrowed in concentration. You've got a knack for this, he said, finally breaking the silence. She picked up another black stone, turning it in her fingers before placing it carefully on the board. It is a fascinating exercise. I am learning a great deal about human thought patterns, Michael smirked. You mean you're learning how to beat me? Elira tilted her head. That too. Marcus and James had returned to the lounge after a quick break, carrying cups of coffee. James leaned against the wall, watching the game unfold. I'll admit, Elira, you're holding your own pretty well. I've seen Michael go up against seasoned players and come out on top. Elira's gaze didn't leave the board. And yet I sense he has more skill than he lets on, Michael shrugged, just trying to keep it interesting. Elira placed another stone, cutting off a small cluster of Michael's pieces. Interesting is one word for it. I prefer challenging, Marcus chuckled, sipping his coffee. She's got you pegged, Michael. Better watch out. Michael leaned forward, his hands resting on the edge of the table. So tell me, Elira, what would a game like this look like on Virnaris? How would your people approach it? She paused, thinking for a moment before answering. We do not have an exact equivalent. Our contests often emphasize physical endurance or direct confrontations of will. This game, however, requires nuance, subtlety. It is as if the board speaks a language I am only beginning to understand. Michael nodded. It's definitely a different kind of test, one that forces you to think about how you approach problems. Elira looked up at him. And how do you approach problems, Michael? Are all humans so adaptable? Not all of us, he admitted. But humans have always had to figure things out on the fly. We face challenges that force us to rethink our strategies, sometimes even change our entire perspective. James chimed in from the sidelines. That's how we made it to the stars, adapting, rethinking, trying new things. Elira considered this. On Virnaris, adaptation is less emphasized. Strength of will, clarity of purpose, These are valued, but perhaps there is wisdom in being flexible, as you say. Michael placed a white stone on the board, blocking her next move. Adaptability isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to survive. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she adjusted her strategy. It would seem this game is teaching more than I anticipated. Marcus leaned back in his chair. That's the funny thing about games like this. They're not just games, they're a mirror. You learn a lot about yourself and your opponent. Like how I'm learning you're a sore loser, Michael, James added with a grin. Michael rolled his eyes. You're never going to let that go, are you? Not a chance, James replied. Elira placed another stone, trapping one of Michael's groups. It seems I am learning about more than just strategy. The interactions between you three, this is part of the game as well, is it not? Michael laughed. You could say that. Banter is part of the experience. James nodded. It's not just about winning. It's about the camaraderie, the back and forth. That's how we connect. Elira regarded them thoughtfully. In my culture, competition is often silent. The focus is entirely on the outcome. But here, I see that the process, the conversation, is just as important. Michael grinned. Exactly. You don't just learn the rules, you learn the people you're playing with. She tilted her head, a small smile forming. Then perhaps I am beginning to understand this game after all. As the match continued, the atmosphere grew lighter. Michael and Elira exchanged playful jabs, their initial formality giving way to an easy rapport. James and Marcus offered commentary, sometimes helpful, sometimes humorous, but always keeping the mood lively. Elira's movements became more deliberate, her strategies more refined. Michael, meanwhile, found himself having to think harder, plan further ahead. When Elira finally made a decisive move that shifted the balance of power on the board, Michael leaned back and let out a low whistle. Okay, I didn't see that one coming. Elira placed her hands on the table, her smile widening just slightly. Perhaps you underestimated me, Michael? Maybe I did, he admitted. But it's been fun seeing you adapt. You're not just playing the game, you're changing the way you think. She met his gaze. And that, I believe, is what makes this game truly worthwhile. Chapter 7. Victory in Defeat. The Go board lay between them, the grid nearly full. The air in the lounge was heavy with a kind of quiet intensity as Elira stared at the stones. Michael sat back in his chair, his fingers lightly drumming the armrest. Around them, a small crowd of crew members had gathered, James and Marcus among them, drawn in by the long, hard-fought match. Elira finally reached for a black stone, her movements deliberate. She placed it carefully on the board, then exhaled. There. I believe this is the correct choice. Michael leaned forward, studying her move. A slow smile spread across his face. Not bad, but I think you left an opening here. He set his own white stone down, cutting into her group. Elira's blue eyes narrowed slightly as she considered. The board again? She traced the lines with her gaze, calculating her next move. You are relentless, she said quietly. Just determined, Michael replied, though his tone was light. James glanced at Marcus and muttered, She's not giving up. Gotta respect that. Marcus nodded. She's got grit, that's for sure. Elira reached for another black stone. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the board, then placed it with a soft click. Let us see if you can counter this. Michael took his time responding, his brow furrowed. He didn't rush, instead weighing his options and carefully considering the implications of every possible move. When he finally set a white stone down, it was with a confident flourish. Your move, Elira. For a long moment she simply stared at the board. The room had grown unusually quiet, the casual banter of the onlookers fading into stillness. Elira tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp, calculating. Then she sat back, letting her hands fall to her lap. I concede, she said softly. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Michael blinked as though he hadn't quite heard her correctly. You... what? I concede, Elira repeated, her voice steady. You have won this match." James let out a low whistle. "Didn't see that coming." Marcus nudged him. "Hey, it's not every day someone admits defeat like that." Michael leaned forward, his expression one of genuine curiosity. "Why now? I mean, you still had moves left." Elira met his eyes. "You played well, Michael. Your strategy, your approach. It was something I could not fully anticipate. I could continue placing stones, but the outcome is clear. This is your victory." Michael scratched the back of his neck, a bit unsure how to respond. "Well, I mean, thanks. But I think you put up one hell of a fight." She gave a faint smile. "You are gracious in victory. That is commendable." James stepped closer, arms crossed. "I've got to say, Elira, you held your own. Most people who go up against Michael get steamrolled. You gave him a real run for his money." "Agreed," Marcus said. "It was one of the best matches I've seen." Elira inclined her head. "Your words are appreciated. But more importantly, I have learned something valuable from this experience." Michael frowned slightly. "What's that?" She placed her hands on the table, her posture straight and composed. "On Virnaris, we are taught that strength is about control, about dominance. But you have shown me that strength can also come from adaptation, from considering perspectives beyond your own. This game is not merely about the stones. It is about how you approach the unknown." Michael nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it. Go teaches you to think ahead, to adjust to your opponent, to see the bigger picture." Elira's gaze softened. "In that sense, you have taught me more than just a game." The room was quiet again, the weight of her words sinking in. Then James broke the silence with a clap. "Well, I think that calls for a drink. Let's celebrate." "A good match?" "No, a great match." Marcus grinned. "You heard the captain. Drinks on me." As the crew began to disperse, heading toward the small bar at the far end of the lounge, Elira and Michael lingered by the table. She gestured toward the board. "You should leave it as it is, as a reminder of this day." Michael tilted his head. "You sure? It's not exactly a masterpiece of strategy." "It is a masterpiece of something more important," she said. "It represents growth, understanding, and the connection forged between two very different people." Michael gave her a warm smile. "If you say so. I'm just glad you enjoyed it." "I did," she replied. "And I look forward to the next time we play." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Next time? You're already planning a rematch?" "Of course," Elira said, standing. "Victory is satisfying. But the pursuit of improvement is even more so," Michael laughed. "I like your style, Elira." She glanced at him, her expression both serious and amused. "And I am beginning to appreciate yours, Michael." They walked toward the bar together, the game still fresh in their minds, but now just one part of a much larger story. Chapter 8. A new alliance, Elira sat quietly in the conference room, gazing out the large window at the star-speckled void. The long game of Go still lingered in her mind, not just the moves and strategies, but the moments of shared understanding. Across the room, Michael was arranging a series of holographic diagrams on a projector. James and Marcus leaned against a console nearby, waiting for the discussion to start. Michael turned to Elira, his expression a mix of focus and warmth. "You ready to present our proposal?" Michael leaned forward, studying her move. A slow smile spread across his face. "Not bad, but I think you left an opening here." He set his own white stone down, cutting into her group. Elira's blue eyes narrowed slightly as she considered. The board again? She traced the lines with her gaze, calculating her next move. "You are relentless," she said quietly. "Just determined," Michael replied, though his tone was light. James glanced at Marcus and muttered, "She's not giving up." "Gotta respect that," Marcus nodded. "She's got grit, that's for sure." Elira reached for another black stone. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the board, then placed it with a soft click. "Let us see if you can counter this." Michael took his time responding, his brow furrowed. He didn't rush, instead weighing his options and carefully considering. the implications of every possible move. When he finally set a white stone down, it was with a confident flourish. "Your move, Elira." For a long moment she simply stared at the board. The room had grown unusually quiet, the casual banter of the onlookers fading into stillness. Elira tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp, calculating. Then she sat back, letting her hands fall to her lap. "I concede," she said softly. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Michael blinked as though he hadn't quite heard her correctly. "You... what?" "I concede," Elira repeated, her voice steady. "You have won this match." James let out a low whistle. "Didn't see that coming." Marcus nudged him. "Hey, it's not every day someone admits defeat like that." Michael leaned forward, his expression one of genuine curiosity. "Why now? I mean, you still had moves left." Elira met his eyes. "You played well, Michael. Your strategy, your approach. It was something I could not fully anticipate. I could continue placing stones, but the outcome is clear. This is your victory." Michael scratched the back of his neck, a bit unsure how to respond. "Well, I mean, thanks. But I think you put up one hell of a fight." She gave a faint smile. "You are gracious in victory. That is commendable." James stepped closer, arms crossed. "I've got to say, Elira, you held your own. Most people who go up against Michael get steamrolled. You gave him a real run for his money." "Agreed," Marcus said. "It was one of the best matches I've seen." Elira inclined her head. "Your words are appreciated. But more importantly, I have learned something valuable from this experience." Michael frowned slightly. "What's that?" She placed her hands on the table, her posture straight and composed. "On Virnaris, we are taught that strength is about control, about dominance. But you have shown me that strength can also come from adaptation, from considering perspectives beyond your own. This game is not merely about the stones. It is about how you approach the unknown." Michael nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it. Go teaches you to think ahead, to adjust to your opponent, to see the bigger picture." Elira's gaze softened. "In that sense, you have taught me more than just a game." The room was quiet again, the weight of her words sinking in. Then James broke the silence with a clap. "Well, I think that calls for a drink. Let's celebrate." "A good match?" "No, a great match." Marcus grinned. "You heard the captain. Drinks on me." As the crew began to disperse, heading toward the small bar at the far end of the lounge, Elira and Michael lingered by the table. She gestured toward the board. "You should leave it as it is, as a reminder of this day." Michael tilted his head. "You sure? It's not exactly a masterpiece of strategy." "It is a masterpiece of something more important," she said. "It represents growth, understanding, and the connection forged between two very different people." Michael gave her a warm smile. "If you say so. I'm just glad you enjoyed it." "I did," she replied. "And I look forward to the next time we play." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Next time? You're already planning a rematch?" "Of course," Elira said, standing. "Victory is satisfying." "But the pursuit of improvement is even more so," Michael laughed. "I like your style, Elira." She glanced at him, her expression both serious and amused. "And I am beginning to appreciate yours, Michael." They walked toward the bar together, the game still fresh in their minds, but now just one part of a much larger story. Chapter 8. A new alliance. Elira sat quietly in the conference room, gazing out the large window at the star-speckled void. The long game of Go still lingered in her mind, not just the moves and strategies, but the moments of shared understanding. Across the room, Michael was arranging a series of holographic diagrams on a projector. James and Marcus leaned against a console nearby, waiting for the discussion to start. Michael turned to Elira, his expression a mix of focus and warmth. "You ready to present our proposal?" Elira nodded. "Yes. I believe we have something meaningful to share." James pushed off the console and gestured for the others to join him at the central table. "Let's get started then. The Vernarian delegation is expecting us in a few minutes." The four of them sat down. Marcus pulled up a holographic interface, displaying the points they'd prepared over the past several days. "So, the idea is straightforward. We highlight the benefits of a cultural exchange program, long-term partnerships, shared knowledge, mutual training, basically showing that working together can strengthen both of our peoples." Elira studied the list carefully. "It is a solid framework. However, I think we should place more emphasis on joint problem-solving exercises. Our recent contest showed me that there is much to be gained from combining our perspectives." Michael smiled. "I like it. It's not just about sharing traditions or science. It's about learning how we approach challenges, like that moment in the game when you shifted your strategy after seeing how I played." James chuckled. "You mean the moment she turned the tables on you?" "Yeah, that was impressive." Marcus grinned. "Impressive and humbling, right, Michael?" Michael rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Fine, I'll admit it. I learned a lot from her, too, and that's the whole point. We grow by learning from each other's strengths." Elira's lips curved into a faint smile. "It seems I have taught you something, after all." Before the discussion could continue, a soft chime signaled the arrival of the Vernarian delegation. The doors slid open, and a small group entered, officials wearing flowing, patterned garments, their faces marked with subtle patterns of scales. The leader, an elder named Veyron, nodded to Elira and the others. "Elira, Captain Hartley, Lieutenant Green, and Mr. Benson," Veyron said in a deep, resonant voice. "We are eager to hear your proposal." James stood and gestured to the holographic display. "Thank you, Elder Veyron. We've spent the past several days working together to develop a plan that we believe will benefit both our civilizations." Elira took a step forward, her presence commanding the room. "Elder Veyron, what we propose is not merely an exchange of resources or knowledge. We envision a collaborative effort to address challenges we both face, whether in diplomacy, technological development, or cultural preservation," Michael added. "Think of it as a partnership where we both bring our unique perspectives to the table. For example, during our recent discussions, Elira and I explored how different strategic approaches, her people's focus on strength and clarity, and our emphasis on adaptability, can lead to innovative solutions." Veyron's gaze shifted to Elira. "And you believe this approach will yield meaningful results?" "I do," Elira said, her voice steady. "By working together, we can create new methods for tackling problems that neither of us could solve alone. My time here has shown me that humans possess a way of thinking that complements our own. It would be a mistake not to explore this further." Marcus leaned forward. "We're talking about more than just policy. We're talking about building something that lasts, a real alliance built on understanding and trust." There was a brief silence as the Vernarian officials exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. Then Veyron spoke again. "You present a compelling case. It seems there is much to gain from this partnership." James nodded. "And it starts with small steps. Joint training exercises, cultural immersion programs, shared projects. We'll build the foundation, and from there, who knows what we can achieve." Elira met Michael's gaze, her blue eyes reflecting a quiet determination. "Indeed. Who knows what we might achieve together?" Michael smiled, his confidence growing. "And if nothing else, we'll get another chance to see who's the better." "Go, player!" Veyron raised a brow, his tone bemused. "This game seems to have had quite an impact on you both." "It did," Elira admitted. "It showed us that even in competition, there is room for mutual respect and growth." Veyron nodded, slowly. "Then let this partnership begin. We will work together on this proposal and see where it takes us." James extended his hand, a gesture that had become familiar to Elira over her time aboard the station. "Here's to a new chapter, together." Veyron hesitated only a moment before clasping James's hand. "Together," he agreed, as the meeting concluded and the Vernarian delegation departed. Elira and Michael lingered in the room. Michael leaned against the table, looking at the now empty go board still set up from their last match. Oh, we might need a new game soon. Something different to keep things interesting. Elira tilted her head. I am open to suggestions. Perhaps next time I will choose the challenge. Michael grinned. Fair enough. Just don't. Go easy on me. She allowed herself a rare, soft laugh. I would not dream of it. As they left the conference room, walking side by side, it was clear that their partnership, much like the alliance they had just set in motion, was built on mutual respect, shared effort, and the understanding that even the most different beings could find common ground.